I was immediately intrigued by Al because here was a man who did not have a glamorous job, yet he had an incredibly positive attitude. Al worked day in, day out, every single day in inclement weathers and temperatures that often exceeded 100 degrees with a positive attitude, always encouraging his teammates. I knew Al had a story to tell, so one day I asked him, "Al, what happened?" And he looked at me and he chuckled, and he said, "She took everything. She took my house, she took my car, she wiped out my savings, she even took my job." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because after the positive attitude I seen, it did not match the story he had just told me. I had to find out the rest of Al's story, so I asked him to tell me how he began to put the pieces of his life back together. He smiled, and he looked up, and he said, "Anna, one day I looked up, and I saw hope." Did you look outside today? Did you look outside yesterday? Did you take a moment to appreciate the beautiful Carolina blue sky that was above us? If so, how did it make you feel? Did you feel a sense of hope? What about opportunity? Did you look through your windshield and think about the possibilities that might be? After a natural disaster, there is what experts refer to as the blue sky period of a recovery phase. During this phase of recovery, mindsets move from surviving the natural disaster to capitalizing on the opportunities created because of the disaster. It is during this period where leaders must move their communities towards a safer, stronger, more resilient future. It is during this period of time where strategic government and private partnerships are formed to best leverage a community's resources. It is during this time where people find out who their neighbors truly are. Of course, after a natural disaster, communities could wither away as the weight of the event tears the fabric of their very lives. But this is not how most communities choose to respond. Communities' lives are shattered, but it is precisely this shattering that creates these new and innovative ways of thinking and gives them room to grow. After Hurricane Katrina, Ricky Matthews was quoted as saying that the storm brought about a realization that buildings don't make a community, people do, and houses don't make home, hearts do. It is precisely this type of realization that occurs frequently during the blue sky phase after a natural disaster. Now, while we pause today for a few moments to think about a different perspective associated with natural disasters, we do not for a moment lose sight of the ongoing human suffering that has occurred in our world over the last few weeks as we've been impacted time and time again by natural disasters. Rather, we pause for a few moments intentionally today so that we might awaken ourselves and be ready to move when within our own spheres of influences we can make a difference. Katrina, a lovely, female, and intriguing name. But when Katrina struck the Gulf Coast in 2005, she was anything but lovely. She left behind in her wake more than $125 billion worth of damage. Almost 2,000 precious lives were lost, and overnight, the unemployment rate in this state effectively doubled. Harvey, Irma. Harvey shocked the Texas Gulf Coast as it went from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane in just 2 days, the worst hurricane Texas has seen in more than 50 years. Hurricane Irma decimated the beautiful state of Florida, destroying more than 90% of the housing stock in the Florida Keys. But these statistics and calculations do very little to accurately convey what our neighbors experience in the weeks, months, and years after a natural disaster. Our neighbors awaken to a world which was previously unthinkable, but now has become their undeniable reality. Experts estimate that it will cost more than $290 billion in decades to recover from these two storms alone. How will they do it? How will these communities rebound? These communities' recovery will best be defined as a series of concurrent activities and interdependent events that will propel these communities towards their future. But the decisions made and the priorities set early on in these recovery periods will have a cascading impact on the success of these recovery programs. These communities must move forward both to rebound to its physical and economic state of well-being, but also to prepare for the future. They must rebuild in safer, stronger, and smarter ways to best position themselves for the future. Disaster resilience has become a matter of federal policy because these communities call upon our federal government in times of need. So federal programs administered by FEMA, HUD, the Small Business Administration, and the Department of Health and Human Services have turned from helping a community restore itself and recover to focusing on a more resilient path forward. One such example is the state of Florida. Now, while Florida suffered tremendous devastation from Irma, experts have already estimated that the damage could have been much worse. But Florida focused over the last decade on strengthening its building codes, forcing its engineers to have a focus on resiliency construction, requiring construction materials to be stronger and safer in preparation for future threats. Thus, the damage left by Irma in Tampa and Naples was less significant than possibly it could have been. Another such example is the city of Galveston. In 2008, Hurricane Ike devastated the city of Galveston. These two homes that you see behind me, while the exterior damage doesn't look that bad, they both were completely flooded. These families lost absolutely everything. So when faced with the decision of whether or not to rebuild, the community leaders paused for a moment during the blue sky period and decided to rebuild in a different way for these two families. They rebuilt homes with a more sustainable future. They elevated these homes. They required resiliency engineering and stronger materials to be used for these homes. Last month, this beautiful community found itself once again in the crosshairs of Hurricane Harvey. Would the motivations, would the intentions, would the goals of the city of Galveston work when faced with a threat such as Harvey? It worked. During the blue sky period after Hurricane Ike yielded resilience for these homes and these families. While they evacuated for Harvey, they returned to their houses, their personal belongings, and their lives still intact. Once the housing sector is restored after a disaster, then the leaders must focus on the local economy. We all know that the economic devastation is not covered as much as the housing loss and infrastructure damage after a natural disaster. But the economic devastation is real and often felt for the longest time after a natural disaster. The tax base is heavily impacted. Sales revenue declines, jobs are lost, wages decline, and experts estimate that between 15 and 40% of the businesses impacted by a natural disaster never reopen. They simply cannot bring back their business that was once there. So leaders are forced to think in new ways. They are forced to look at their community's economy and evaluate whether or not it should be brought back to the way it was, or should they train their workforce in new ways? Should they develop new skills? Should they focus to align new partnerships, better preparing their community for their new reality? One such example is the development of broadband infrastructure through disaster recovery programs. We all are aware that disasters often hit the most impoverished and rural areas. It's a cruel fact in disaster recovery. And now, because of disaster recovery programs, the federal government is encouraging the installation of broadband infrastructure within these communities, narrowing the digital divide, creating a new world of opportunity for these communities, which was previously unthinkable. Now their access to new online courses, job training, and new jobs are readily available within their own homes. Now they have access to the world, which pre-disaster they could not even fathom. In one state, a disaster recovery program invested millions of dollars in the state's medical and nursing school. Not only did this state capitalize on increased applications and availability for medical professionals, it also created state-of-the-art technology and facilities. This investment not only rebuilt this medical school and this nursing school, it created a new future for medical professionals within this state. Another example is the workforce development programs, often formed and developed in disaster-impacted states. One state took millions of dollars, trained 12,000 individuals, and out of that workforce development program, placed 7,325 individuals in new permanent jobs. And these jobs were critical to the restoration of that state. Jobs within the healthcare sector, construction sector, and advanced manufacturing. Life-changing moments. You remember me telling you about my friend Al. Al was one of these individuals. You see, Al was right. Hurricane Katrina did take everything. She took his home. She took his car. She wiped out his savings. And she took his job. After the shelters closed, Al moved into the woods behind his church. His local congregation took care of him for many, many months, almost over a year, until a federally funded, long-term disaster recovery construction project started in Al's community. Because Al was homeless, he received a hiring preference. He got the job, he kept the job, and he moved up within this company. Al moved out of the woods behind this local church into an affordable housing development where he stayed for a year. He kept his job, and he was promoted once again, where he moved to his new apartment. And Al thus began to put the pieces of his life back together again. Al's story is one of thousands just like it. Whether it be an individual, a business, or a community, these are the stories of disaster recovery. Stories of realizing beauty from ashes. Stories of moving beyond the disaster to a more resilient future. Stories of moving from adversity to opportunity. Thank you.